Welcome back to another week of pandemic and economic crisis, 26 million Americans unemployed at least. And on top of that, what's the latest figure? 90,000 Americans have died. Look, I don't want to dwell on the negatives, but over the weekend, I saw former President Barack Obama, as many of you did, give a commencement address, and it reminded me just what it is like to have a president who is coherent and who can at least inspire some degree of confidence and understands facts and is trustworthy. All of this would be so much more bearable if we had somebody at the helm who was not nuts. And I think many of us, obviously, you're going stir crazy and I'm going stir crazy, and the anxiety and frustration of all of this continues to build. But I'm continuously reminded of how awful it is to have Donald Trump and his sociopathic tendencies and his pathological narcissism at the top of this nation at a time like this. It would be bad enough to have a pandemic, bad enough to have all of this unemployment. And actually, the latest data is closer to 36 million unemployed. And it would be awful and it would be a terrible tragedy. But to have somebody in the White House who is so untrustworthy, who lies like most of us breathe, makes it all that much the worse. I want to talk about a couple of things because they are interrelated. And what I like to do, and thank you again for joining me, what I like to do is kind of connect the dots and put it into some perspective for you, and then I will get to your questions. All right. First of all, I want to mention something about Steve Linick, the Inspector General of the State Department, who was fired. We've had now a pattern. There have been 4 firings of inspectors general. They have occurred, most of them on Friday nights. The reason they happen late Friday is so that the press basically is caught. The media doesn't really, people are not paying attention. Friday evenings, it turns out, is the time during the week when the public is paying least attention to what is happening in the country. So obviously, if you have bad news or news that's a little bit embarrassing, you release it then. What is it particularly about Steve Linick? I mean, he's the 4th Inspector General. You had Grimm, right, at the HHS, Health and Human Services, who was fired because she, as Inspector General, pointed out all of the ways in which the Trump administration had failed to respond to the coronavirus. You had Atkinson, who was fired from the intelligence. He was in the Inspector General at intelligence. He was fired because he passed on the whistleblower complaint right on to ultimately Congress that led to the impeachment. And before that, you had the Inspector General. No, Inspector General Fine. That was the 4th one. And Fine was fired, or actually removed from his job as overseeing the $2.2 trillion coronavirus slush fund. I mean, it is in effect a slush fund overseen in part by the Trump administration. And so you've got all of these firings occurring of inspectors general. But what is most worrying about the latest one, that is Steve Linick, is that not only is there a lot of information already pouring out of the State Department that Linick was looking at Michael Pompeo's kind of expense accounts and ways in which Pompeo was using money for his own family, but it's also something even more interesting. You see, Congress had said to the Trump administration, forbidden the Trump administration for giving any money and using any money for helping Saudi Arabia in terms of purchasing arms. This was a concern basically because Saudi Arabia had been using a lot of American arms and armaments and military equipment to commit human rights and humanitarian abuses in Yemen. So Congress said essentially to the State Department, no, Oh, you can't do that. And to the Trump administration, no, you can't do that. But you may remember Trump declared an emergency, an emergency out of nowhere that allowed him to go ahead and provide arms to the Saudis. You know, it turns out that the Inspector General Linick was looking into that emergency declaration because there were it was fishy. There was nothing to it. There was nothing that actually justified the declaration of an emergency from Trump that would in turn allow him and the State Department and Pompeo to provide all of those armaments to Saudi Arabia. Now, you know what I'm getting at. The Trump administration is very close to the Saudis. I mean, Jared Kushner is, best friends of the Saudi crown prince. There are very, very close relationships. There may be financial relationships. In fact, there are a lot of indications that there are financial relationships. So this firing of the Inspector General Linick, just as he is completing his investigations with regard to the emergency declaration that allowed all of those armaments, and also this investigation of Pompeo for personal family use of federal taxpayer money. It's not only does it smell bad, but it is bad. And all of these firings of inspector generals are a pattern by Trump of retaliation, but also retaliation with an eye toward the election, making sure damaging information does not get out. I was thinking about this just over the weekend and thinking back 47 years ago, during the Watergate investigation, it was pretty clear that it started to become clear that Richard Nixon was using the Justice Department for political ends. He was weaponizing the administration of justice, and he was also weaponizing all of these departments. He had people in the federal departments that he was using for his upcoming election. And then during the Watergate investigation, it became clear that that's what he was doing. And then you remember in 1974, the summer of 74, he resigned because it looked like he was going to be impeached. And then after that, Congress and the Ford administration and the Carter administration developed a whole series of reforms to prevent anything like the scandal, the outrage of Watergate from happening again. One of those reforms happened to do with campaign finance, and we know what happened to that. The Supreme Court in Citizens United against the Federal Election Commission in 2010 got rid of that, gutted that. But there were two other very important reforms. One had to do with the independence of the Justice Department. And everybody knew during the Nixon days that John Mitchell, and it became apparent actually in the Watergate investigation, that John Mitchell, his attorney general, had weaponized the Justice Department. And so there were a lot of executive orders and congressional oversight to make sure that the Justice Department would never again be politicized and weaponized by a president as a means of rewarding friends and penalizing enemies, so that a president like Nixon could not entrench himself through the use of our system of justice. Well, what has happened? Obviously, William Barr at Justice has done exactly that, and we will get to that in a minute. But the other reform that I really wanted to call your attention to had to do with inspectors general. Before the Watergate reforms, there were no inspectors general. Part of the Watergate reform era was to put into every department inspectors general, people who would be independent and who could mount investigations of wrongdoing in those departments, investigations that had to do not only with fraud and abuse, but also had to do with abuse of power, and usually the president's power. That's what initiated all of this. That's why this connection is so interesting, particularly to Inspector General Steve Linick, because that is precisely the kind of abuse of power that the Watergate reforms were getting after when they set up the whole Inspector General system. Now, you see, Trump is trying to completely disband, get rid of the inspectors general. He is trying to politicize, and he is weaponizing the Justice Department. He is trying, in advance of his election, especially 6 months, 5.5 months until election day, he wants to use all the instruments of government to help him, obviously, illegally get reelected. And he's no longer worried about what? About impeachment, because they tried, the Democrats tried, the public tried. It's not just the Democrats, the House, and the Senate Republicans showed Trump that they were loyal to him. So he feels like he doesn't have to worry about that. He doesn't have to worry about anything. He can get away with anything. That's his view. That's why he's so quick to fire these inspectors general that are causing him some potential worry. Could be embarrassing. And that's why this Saudi arms deal. Keep an eye on this Saudi arms deal. The other thing I wanted to just sketch for you is that Trump is doing nothing, absolutely nothing. He's doing nothing about the coronavirus. He's done nothing about it. We know that. He was late. He has a task force. He doesn't even know what's going on half the time. He stopped even giving press conferences. But also he's doing nothing about the unemployment situation. The stimulus bills have all come from Congress. He has been a bystander. Yes, Mnuchin has been involved in the negotiations, but Trump actually is doing zilch. Now, the next big coronavirus piece of legislation, and we know there has to be another stimulus bill because you've got 36 million Americans who are unemployed and probably closer to 20 or 25% unemployment right now. Well, this is Great Depression levels of unemployment. You've got to do something. I mean, people need help. Nancy Pelosi in the House got the House to pass a $3 trillion piece of legislation on Friday. Very important. Of course we can afford it. I know some of you are saying, well, can we really afford $3 trillion on top of the $3 trillion we've already spent? Let me remind you, this was before the economy imploded, a $21 trillion economy each year, capable of producing $21 trillion. So another $3 trillion when you've got almost a quarter of American workers out of jobs is nothing. I mean, we ought to be spending far, far more than this. So Nancy Pelosi gets the House to pass this $3 trillion. It includes, very important, $1 trillion for states and locales running out of money. They are the first responders, folks. I mean, states and locales, they have the healthcare workers and they've got the firefighters and the police and the social workers and all of the other, and the public hospitals and the portion of the healthcare system that is public, that is on states and locales. They need the money. By their state and local provisions, they can't run deficits, and they're not getting any tax revenues. Remember, I mean, tax revenues, state sales tax revenues are down to nothing. Income tax revenues are very, very low, and states are not even getting those yet. So the states are running out of money in this crisis period. And by the way, the states have already fired, let people go, 1 million state workers. So part of the unemployment solution and part of the unemployment problem is that states and locales are running out of money. Nancy Pelosi comes up with a very important bill. Now, what is the response of Mitch McConnell and the Republicans and Trump? Mitch McConnell says, no, there's no way. We're not going to go along with this. What I want, Mitch McConnell says, I want immunity for businesses that are reopening. Immunity from lawsuits concerning the fact that some people are going to get coronavirus. Well, that makes absolutely no sense, because how can we reopen this country if businesses don't face any accountability if they are making their workers and potential customers sick? Obviously, that's a no-starter. That's a no-brainer. Trump, meanwhile, says to Nancy Pelosi and to the Democrats, nothing. I'm going to veto anything that comes out of the House. This is dead on arrival. Those were his words. And what does Trump come up with? Over the weekend, in fact, on Friday and then on Saturday again, his chief economic advisor, Larry Kudlow, says, well, what we really think there ought to be is a massive tax cut for corporations. Any corporation that rips up its world supply chain and brings it back to the United States, we'll give them, instead of 21% tax, we'll make it a 10% tax. I mean, we'll just give away the store to big corporations. And then we also want a capital gains tax cut, and we're going to have a payroll tax cut. Now, the thing about all these tax cuts that Larry Kudlow and Donald Trump want is that they are all for the wealthy. The biggest beneficiaries are big corporations and the wealthy. When you give a tax cut to big corporations and the wealthy, we know nothing trickles down. Nothing. We've done it before. We've done this again and again and again. We had a big tax cut in December of 2017. Nothing trickled down. In fact, all the corporations did was use the tax cut to buy back their shares of stock. George W. Bush, huge tax cuts. Nothing trickled down. Wages kept being stagnant. Ronald Reagan, nothing trickled down. Stagnant wages. We know that nothing trickles down. The reason it is important to give people aid directly, and that's also in Nancy Pelosi's bill. A lot of that bill is providing direct funding, relief to individuals. Why is that so important? It's because it's average working people, the working class, and the poor who spend what they have. If you are wealthy, you're not going to spend it. If you're a big corporation, you spend it on buying back your shares of stock. If you are a wealthy individual, you're not going to spend that extra money. We know that people who are working people, working class, lower middle class, and the poor, they spend it. That means that every dollar of stimulus that is given to or transferred to a person who is low income has a multiplier effect. It generates a lot of economic activity. If there is not that kind of multiplier effect, then the economy has no chance of getting going again. Do you follow me? So here's Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats coming up with something that is good and important, and the HEROES Act, it's called, the acronym. We ought to support it. All of you, all of us need to support that. But then we have the Republicans who say dead on arrival, and Mitch McConnell doesn't want to do it. He wants to provide liability protection for businesses that are opening up. This, friends, is a huge problem, and it is a problem for Republicans because as this economic emergency and pandemic continue to worsen, and sadly, there is no indication that it is getting better. I mean, the number of deaths is plateauing, but that's happening as many states, more than half of the states, are starting to eliminate their shelter-in-place rules, which means that the pandemic could easily worsen and the economy could easily worsen as well. So we have this is a huge problem over the next weeks or months. We're undertaking a very dangerous experiment in this country with regard to reopening, and we've got nobody in charge. Let me just also mention to you the quandary that Donald Trump is obviously finding himself in right now. Because as the economy continues to get worse, as the pandemic continues to, in many respects, either worsen or we are undertaking a gigantic and very dangerous experiment, Donald Trump doesn't have anything to run on. He is looking at that election November 3rd, and he is saying to himself, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? How do I mount an election campaign? What do I run on? What's my message? It turns out that Donald Trump is now doing, and this is why he is firing the inspectors general. This is also why he is engaging in this crazy stuff, this tweet storm, accusing Joe Biden of everything. I mean, he's throwing everything at the wall. He's accusing Joe Scarborough, TV hosts, of murdering people. I mean, he's going absolutely crazy in terms of trying to blame others and implicate others and create a kind of a conspiracy against him. And that's where you get all this deep state stuff coming up again. And and going after the FBI. And this is where Barr comes in once again, Barr trying to come up with a conspiracy by Obama and by, well, there's nothing there, obviously. I mean, Obamagate, nothing there. It is a concoction created by Trump because he's got nothing else, because the economy is dead. We are in Great Depression territory, and the pandemic doesn't show any sign. As more and more places open, the pandemic is getting more and more dangerous. I wish I could be more upbeat, but you know, all of this comes down to you. It comes down to me. It comes down to all of us, and it comes down to November 3rd. It comes down ultimately to the next election, organizing and mobilizing and being energized for this next election. All right, I've got to get to your questions. First question, Sam Moss. The insider trading we're seeing is making me sick. If Senator Burr were listening right now, what would you say to him? Richard Burr. I would say to you, Richard Burr, resign. Don't just resign your chairmanship of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Get out of there. I mean, the evidence shows, and it's very clear, you made sales of up to $1.7 million of stocks when you had information just after you got closed door information in a private Senate Intelligence Committee hearing with the intelligence agencies who said this pandemic is going to affect the entire United States. It's very dangerous. You were told that. You tell the public right after that hearing, don't worry, pandemic is no big deal. You were mouthing Donald Trump's lies, but then you secretly were selling your shares of stock before anybody else knew it. That's called insider trading. That is illegal, Senator Burr. That is not only illegal, it's an abuse of power. And you tell me, how are we supposed to believe our leaders at a time like this if they exploit their positions of power for their own personal gain? How can we trust, Senator Burr, our political institutions when people like you are, for personal gain, basically in such conflicts of interest? How can we trust the government when there is such a high degree of corruption? And I'm talking about you, Senator Burr, but I'm also talking about what is happening in the executive branch. You must resign. All right? Sam, was that okay? That's what I would tell Burr. Sally Davis, Obamagate, what the heck is that? Sally, it's nothing. It's a deflection. I already talked about that. Corwin Stewart, what do you think about Obama's commencement address? As I said, it is such a pleasure to have a president who is coherent and articulate and in command of facts and steady and calm. Here I say it as I lose my own calmness and steadiness. Chris Epstein, what are your thoughts on Attorney General William Barr? Does he have any regard for the rule of law? No, he doesn't. It is very clear. His motion to drop the prosecution of Michael Flynn shows that he has utter contempt for the rule of law, if we didn't know that already, in terms of what he did with Mueller and what he has continuously done at the Justice Department and interfering in Roger Stone's case. In terms of the punishment Roger Stone, that the department was going to recommend for Roger Stone. I mean, once again and again, Barr is doing Trump's bidding. This is not neutral justice. Barr ought to resign. He's not going to resign, obviously. I think we ought to impeach Barr, actually. I mean, I really do. I think that there has been no attorney general as bad as William Barr, who sacrificed justice for the sake of what? His president? He's a sycophant. He's a lapdog of Donald Trump. No, he is as bad as John Mitchell under Richard Nixon, and John Mitchell ended up in jail. Gene Allen, Trump has shown us that the Constitution is weak. The Constitution does not have any remedies. What do we do? What remedies exist if not the Constitution? Gene, there are only 3 remedies, all right, for a president, for dealing with a president who is as illegal, unconstitutional, out of his mind as Donald Trump. And we have tried one. One is impeachment. But if you have Senate Republicans who don't want to put the country ahead of their own party, you can't really do it if they're in control of one of the chambers of Congress. And one reason we've got to get rid of them, even if Donald Trump hopefully is not reelected, we still have got to get rid of these people in the Senate, these Senate Republicans who don't really have the nation's interest in mind. The second thing we can do is the 25th Amendment that is in the Constitution, that is designed when a president basically is incapacitated, but you need to have the cabinet involved, and Trump will fire anybody if he gets any whiff of a plot against him. He's already paranoid. And the third and most important is voting. All right, elections. It's called elections. This is why I keep coming back to November 3rd. That's what we ought to be talking about again and again. Please, not only we, but all of us, all of you who are watching, all of your friends, everybody else. We've got to mobilize, organize, energize. We've got to be ready and get out there for November 3rd. And also support the Democrats in the House. Nancy, as I mentioned, Nancy Pelosi and that very important bill that came out of the House just now, the heroes. John Deere, should we worry about Trump's reelection or that America has become susceptible to his lies and might reelect him? Of course, John. I mean, the polls show that he is dropping, but remember from 2016, how the polls showed that that Hillary Clinton was going to take the election. Don't trust the polls. Don't trust anything. Don't trust Trump. Don't trust Putin. But don't give up. Don't become cynical. Don't give up the fight. Because this fight is worth everything. This is worth our future. This is our democracy at stake. If Trump gets another 4 years, you can kiss the Supreme Court totally goodbye. If Trump gets another 4 years, you can kiss our democracy goodbye. This is the most corrupt administration since Richard Nixon, to go back to the beginning of my discussion today. We're coming to an end of that discussion. I want to thank all of you. I want to thank you for joining me. I want to thank you for your activism. I want to thank you for being as concerned as you obviously are. It's difficult. The easiest thing in the world right now, in a time of pandemic and mass unemployment and Trumpian craziness, is to just turn off, tune out, forget it all. Just don't even read the papers. That would be the easy thing. But you are not taking the easy way by virtue of you tuning in today. So thank you for that. And you are an army of change agents and truth tellers, and we are depending on you. That's one reason we do this work here at Inequality Media, because we're trying to arm you with information and facts and videos and all sorts of other things that you can use, and then go out and be that army of truth tellers. I want to also thank you for your support of our videos. We don't talk about that very much. I don't talk about it very much, nearly as much as I should, but they are going gangbusters. I mean, the most recent video we have, the real reason Trump wants to reopen the economy. We've had 5 million views, 5 million views on that one video. So because of you, because your support of us, and because we are hopefully supporting you in terms of giving you the ammunition we need, we are making huge progress, and you are making progress. So enormous thanks to you. We will get through this. We will get through this week. See you next week.